Georges Simenon. The open window. It was 5 minutes to 12 when the three men met outside number 116 Rue Montmartre, near the junction with Rue Montmartre. Shall we go in? Let's have a quick glass first. They downed an aperitif at a nearby counter. Then, turning up their coat collars and burying their hands in their pockets against the bitter cold, they entered the building's courtyard. After a long search for entryway C, they finally found it and climbed to the third floor. In this labyrinth of an old building, every door sported an enamel or brass plate announcing a workshop for artificial flowers or the office of a film company. At the end of a long, dim corridor on the third floor, a sign read, French Trade. Inspector Lucas pushed the door open and led the way. Touching the brim of his hat in greeting, he asked, "Is Oscar Laget?" A man of about 50 sat at a desk covered in green baize, sticking stamps onto envelopes. At first, he shook his head no, but something in the visitor's manner struck him. He looked at them more closely, seemed to understand exactly who they were, and stood up. "The boss is never in during the morning," he explained. "What do you want with him?" "I have a warrant for his arrest," Lucas replied, tapping the paper poking out his pocket. "Where can he be found at this hour?" "I doubt you'll find him. He's either the Bourse or at a restaurant nearby. He'll be back around 4. Lucas exchanged a look with his colleagues. "Show us his office." The clerk obediently led them down a narrow hallway and opened a door. The office was indeed empty. "Fine. We'll be back at 4. If Maigret got involved in the case from the start this time, it was by pure chance. At 3 in the afternoon, he was sitting in his office at the Quai d'Orfèvres when word came through that several Algerians had been brawling near the port d'Italy, leaving each other with knife wounds. Such incidents usually fell under Inspector Lucas's jurisdiction. "I can't go, Chief. I have to be at Rue Montmartre at 4 to arrest Laget." "Who?" "Laget. Don't you remember? From French Trade. The warrant came down from the financial prosecutor. You head to the port d'Italy," Maigret said. "I'll handle Rue Montmartre." Maigret worked until nearly 4, then, taking 2 inspectors with him, jumped into a taxi. They passed under the archway into the courtyard. Looking up at the tangled mess of grimy staircases, Maigret asked instinctively, "Is there another way out here?" "I don't think so." In any case, it didn't matter. It was a routine job. The arrest of a shady, small-time businessman. 3rd floor, Chief. To the right, business as usual. The 50-year-old clerk, Ernest Descharneau, was still at his desk, but now he was addressing envelopes instead of stamping them. 5 other people were sitting there, waiting for an appointment. "Is Oscar Laget back?" Maigret asked, the pipe still clamped in his teeth. "Not yet. He's due any minute. These gentlemen are waiting for him, too." He glanced at these gentlemen, likely small creditors who had been cooling their heels for 2 hours, hoping to squeeze a few centimes out of Laget. Maigret tapped his ash onto the dirty floor and packed a fresh pipe. "There's a hell of a draft in here," he grumbled, pulling up his collar. Ernest Descharneau tilted his head, listened, and said in a low voice, "I think that's him now." "How?" "He doesn't come through this door. He always uses the back entrance. I'll go tell him you're here." He stood up, but before he could finish his sentence, a shot rang out from the direction of Lager's office. Descharneau lunged toward the sound, but Maigret shoved him aside and went in first. The corridor turned at a sharp angle. At the far end, an open window was visible, the source of the biting draft. It looked out over a small inner court. Maigret, who was perpetually cold, shut it as he passed. He expected Lager's office to be locked on the inside, but the door swung open. A stout, thick-set man sat slumped back in his chair. A gaping wound showed at his right temple, and on the carpet beneath his dangling hand lay a revolver. "Nobody move," Maigret barked, turning back. From that moment on, he felt a vague sense that something was wrong, something false and improbable about the whole scene, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. With his hands in his pockets and his hat pushed to the back of his head, he took his habitual stance, studying the room and sniffing the air. Finally, his eyes settled on a pair of women's shoes peeking out from beneath the window curtain. "Hey, what are you doing there?" he snapped. The curtains parted, and a youngish woman in a fur coat stepped out, looking at the three men with terror. She stammered, "Who are you? What are you doing here? And you?" "I am Madame Lager." The police inspector, who had been leaning over the body, straightened up and announced dispassionately, "He's dead." Maigret instructed Inspector Janvier to report the incident to the local precinct, the prosecutor's office, and the forensics department. Meanwhile, the chief inspector paced gloomily around the room, which was now bathed in bright sunlight. "And how long have you been here?" he asked Madame Lager suddenly, shooting a sideways glance at her. "I came in almost the same time you did. When I heard footsteps, I got scared and hid, just in case." "Why?" "I don't know. I wanted to find out." "Find out what?" "What was happening. Are you certain he's dead?" She wasn't crying, but she looked utterly bewildered. Maigret didn't press her further. He turned to the second inspector and whispered, "Stay here and keep an eye on her. Don't let her touch a thing." He then returned to the waiting room, where the visitors were still lingering. "Don't leave yet. I might need you." "Is he dead?" "As dead as they come. As for you," he added, addressing Descharneau, "I need to speak with you in private. We can use Madame Lager's office. If she's not in there." Madame Lager's office sat directly across from her husband's. Maigret locked the door so they wouldn't be disturbed. He mechanically fiddled with a stove damper that refused to budge, then gestured for clerk to take a seat. "Sit down. Name? Age? Tell me everything you know." He forced a man to sit while he himself, following his lifelong habit, began to pace the room. "My name is Ernest Descharneau. I am 54 years old. I'm a former businessman, a lieutenant in the reserves." "And currently a clerk," Maigret grunted. "Not exactly," Descharneau countered with a touch of bitterness. "But in a way, you're right. It comes to that." His clothes were worn, but neat. He carried himself with that quiet dignity found in men who endured a great deal of misfortune. "Before the war, I had a shop on Boulevard Corsellis. Business was quite good." "What kind of shop?" "Arms, ammunition, and hunting gear. Then I went to the front as a private, and by the third year of the war, I'd worked my way up to artillery lieutenant. Only then did Maigret notice the thin red ribbon of the Legion of Honor on the man's lapel. He also noticed that while Descharneau spoke with feverish haste, he never stopped listening to the sounds coming from the back of the office. "I met Oscar Laget in Champagne. He was one of my men." "A private?" "Yes. He was promoted to sergeant later. When I returned after being demobilized, my shop was closed and my wife was ill. I had a little money left, but unfortunately, I invested it in a venture that went bust a year later. My wife died." Footsteps echoed outside. Maigret knew the local police had arrived, but he didn't budge. Perching on the edge of the desk, he asked, "And then?" "By that time, Lager had started a chemical company. I went to see him. His office was on Boulevard Haussmann. He took me on as a clerk. Since you come to arrest him, you must know what kind of man he was." "Keep talking," Maigret urged. At times, it seemed as if Maigret wasn't even listening. "The chemical company lasted 3 years, and I managed to save a bit of money. But one fine day, Lager shut it down and I was out on the street. There were rumors of a prosecution, but that didn't stop Lager from founding a new company a year later with great fanfare. French Trade." Descharneau hesitated, unsure if he should continue, or if Maigret was even interested. Voices and footsteps drifted in from the other rooms. At one point, he employed 60 people. His office took up 3 floors in a new building on Rue Beaubourg. Lager published trade journals for various guilds, the Butcher's Gazette, the Broker's Bulletin, the Leather Trade Directory, and others. "Were you working for him then?" "When I went to him, he took me into the office but didn't give me a specific title. I was his right-hand man, so to speak. I became a nominee for most of the societies he founded. Sometimes I even manage them. So now you'll have to face the court as well? Possibly. DeCharneau replied grimly. You have no idea how business was done here. Even when we had 60 employees, we'd be running all over town trying to find 2,000 francs. Meanwhile, Lager had his own car, and Madame Lager had hers. They spent 800,000 francs building a villa, while the servants went 3 months without pay. We were always robbing Peter to pay Paul. Lager would disappear for 3 days at a time, then return in a state of high excitement and make me sign papers. Hurry up, our luck has turned this time. I didn't even know what I was signing. If I hesitated, he'd call me ungrateful and remind me he'd pull me out of poverty. Sometimes he'd have fits of generosity. If he came into money, he might suddenly give me 20 or 30,000 francs, though he might ask for it back the very next day. In short, after many ups and downs, we reached our current state. Madame Lager decided to take over the business herself. She's been coming to the office every day. Maigret pulled the pipe from his mouth and suddenly asked a very simple question, one that, nonetheless, made DeCharneau flinch. Where did you have lunch? When? Today? Let me see. I stepped out for a moment to buy a roll and some sausage. You can find the breadcrumbs and the sausage casing in the basket under my desk. Did no one come by? I don't follow. At 2 o'clock, the creditors arrived, as they always do. It was because of them that Lager avoided the main staircase. He'd come in from Rue Montmartre, wind through the long corridors, and pass through 2 different buildings. He always preferred that route. And his wife, she used that way, too. Does she always come to the office at 4? No, usually she arrives by 2. But today is the first Wednesday of the month, and she went to ministry to collect her pension. She's a war widow. Lager was her second husband. Do you think she is capable of killing her husband? I couldn't say. Do you think Lager could have committed suicide? I don't know that either. I've told you everything I know. What's to become of me now? Maigret opened the door. I'll still be needing you. When he stepped back into Lager's office, about 15 people were busy at work under the glare of powerful lamps. The photographer from the forensics department had finished his task and was packing away his gear. The investigating magistrate and a young assistant prosecutor were talking in low voices, while Madame Lager, her face drawn, remained seated in the corner, appearing dazed by the noise and commotion. Found anything yet? The police commissioner asked Maigret. Nothing yet. And you? We found the casing from this revolver. Madame Lager identified it as her husband's weapon. He kept it in his desk drawer at all times. May I have a word with you, Madame Lager? Maigret led her into the same office where he had questioned DeCharneau. Forgive me for disturbing you at a time like this. I have only a few questions. First, what is your opinion of DeCharneau? My husband did so much for him, rescued him from poverty. DeCharneau was his confidant. Why do you ask? Has DeCharneau been speaking ill of him? He's capable of it. He's a bitter man. Second question. Maigret interrupted. When did you first come to the office today? I stopped by at 2 o'clock to pick up some documents before going to the ministry. Until recently, I hadn't claimed my war widow's pension, but things have changed now. What time did your husband usually arrive in the afternoon? Actually, at 3 o'clock, let me explain, for business reasons. He often had a lunch with clients. Those lunches were quite heavy. There was a lot of wine. Since he suffered from insomnia, he made a habit of napping for an hour in his office after lunch. And today? Truly, I don't know. At 2 o'clock, DeCharneau told me that my husband would be waiting for me at 4 sharp on a matter of great importance. He didn't mention police? No, thank you. As he showed her to the door, Maigret struggled to pin down that vague sensation he'd felt upon entering Lager's office. At times, he felt he was close to the truth, only for the answer to slip away again a moment later. The room felt hot now, pipe in teeth, hat pushed back as usual. He returned to the waiting room looking like a man who didn't know where to start. The 4 creditors waiting to squeeze money out of Lager were still sitting there. Maigret looked them over one by one and addressed a tall, thin, poorly dressed young man. "How long have you been here?" "I arrived at 10 or 15 minutes past 2. Descharneau, back at his desk, was listening to the conversation. "And has anyone else come in since then?" "No one, except for these gentlemen here." He pointed to the other waiting creditors, who nodded in agreement. "Has anyone left?" "No." "Wait, did Monsieur Descharneau stay in his seat the whole time?" "Yes, the whole time." But having said that, the young man paused to think. "Wait, he did step out into the corridor once because the telephone rang." "At what time?" "I don't really remember. About 3:45. Yes, it was shortly before you arrived." "Tell me, Descharneau, who was that on the phone?" "I don't know. It was a wrong number. Someone asking if this was a dentist's office." Before uttering those words, he lowered his gaze toward the envelope spread across the desk, as if searching for an answer. They were circulars ready to be mailed to Lager's numerous clients. Maigret's eyes mechanically followed Descharneau's gaze. On the top envelope, he read, "To Mr. Eugene Devry, dentist, Rue—" "Well," the commissioner asked, returning to the magistrate and the assistant prosecutor. "Suicide," the latter declared. "According to the doctor, the shot was fired from a distance of 15 centimeters. It seems Lager was quite desperate to leave this world behind. If he—" The magistrate and the assistant prosecutor both looked at Maigret as he cut him off. "Or he was asleep. You mean to suggest that this was—" The magistrate's gaze shifted to Madame Lager. She sat with a strained expression while her fingerprints were being taken. "I don't know yet," Maigret admitted. "If it is murder, it is a very clever one. Note that we were practically present when it happened. It's as if the killer intentionally waited for police to arrive." Maigret turned to the medical examiner. "And you, doctor? Did you find anything unusual?" "Nothing, really. Death was instantaneous." "And after that?" "What do you mean?" "Nothing. I suppose Lager was even more sensitive to the cold than I am. Notice how the back of his chair is pressed right against the radiator." The magistrate and the assistant prosecutor exchanged a look. Maigret tapped his pipe against his heel again. For the sake of decency, Lager's face had been covered with a waffle-weave towel from the wash basin. The experts had finished their work and were merely waiting for the signal to leave. "Tell me, Commissioner," Maigret said suddenly, "I see 2 telephones on the desk here. One is an outside line. The other is an internal extension. It must connect to the desk in the waiting room. Be so kind as to call me from there." The commissioner stepped out. Everyone waited, watching Maigret, who appeared lost in thought. A minute passed, then another. Finally, the commissioner returned, looking puzzled. "Didn't you hear it? I rang several times." "Would you step this way with me, Monsieur le Juge?" Maigret said, heading toward the office where he had previously spoken with Descharneau and Madame Lager. Maigret stood in his favorite pose, back to the fire, speaking in a casual tone, almost as if apologizing for how quickly his investigation had progressed, wishing not to offend the magistrate. "By pure chance, I happen to be here at the exact moment to observe the clerk." "You suspect him? But that's impossible." "Wait. You likely notice yourself that, both physically and temperamentally, he is one of the post-war failures. They are perhaps the saddest legacy the last war left us. Certainly its most miserable victims. This man was once known as Lieutenant Descharneau, and one must assume he was a perfectly decent fellow. But then came the armistice, and nothing survived of his former life. His business collapsed, his wife died. He was picked up by Lager, a man whose vulgarity and total lack of scruples were a guarantee of success in these murky times. A silence fell. Maigret was packing his 4th pipe. "I would say that explains everything," he sighed. "Lager used Descharneau exactly the way a typewriter uses an honest man. Descharneau's integrity revolted against Lager's machinations more than once. More than once it surrendered, then rose again. Ultimately, a hatred grew in Descharneau's soul. Hatred for the man who considered himself his benefactor. A hatred made all the more bitter because Lager, in turn, was sliding down a slippery slope. In the end, Descharneau realized he had sold his soul for a pittance. I don't see where you're going with this. Where? I don't quite know myself. At least, I didn't know a moment ago. I simply tried to imagine the two of them, the master and the servant, the former sergeant and the former officer, their roles reversed. I imagined their office, besieged by penniless creditors and bailiffs, all the tricks, the friendly bills of exchange that go unpaid, the rubber checks, all the pathetic accessories of an inevitable crash. That was likely the basis of the arrest warrant. One moment, excuse me. Maigret opened the door and called for Descharneau, who appeared looking terrified. Tell me, Descharneau, how many times has Lager been prosecuted? I'm not entirely sure. 5 or 6, I believe. And every time he managed to slip away? Yes, he had influential connections. You may go. Thank you. Once the clerk had left, Maigret turned back to the magistrate. You see, Descharneau was determined that, this time, Lager wouldn't slip away. Descharneau is a sick man. You saw it yourself. I'd wager he has a stomach ulcer, perhaps even cancer. He's a man who can no longer stand on his own. What would have become of him after Lager's arrest? A piece of shipwrecked driftwood. You see men like him in the soup lines for the unemployed. And all the while, Descharneau believes, rightly or wrongly, that Lager is the one responsible for his ruin. But how could he physically carry out? I am merely offering my opinion, Maigret interrupted, which I believe will be confirmed very soon. At noon today, a sergeant and 2 inspectors arrived to arrest Lager. He wasn't here, so Descharneau suggested they return at 4. Don't forget that for long days and months, this man sat in that office, licking stamps and addressing envelopes. He had more than enough leisure time to weigh and consider 1,000 plans for revenge, each more ingenious than the last. By his own admission, he didn't go to lunch today, contrary to his habit. I suspect he spent that time performing a very meticulous piece of work here, the traces of which we are about to find. After all, a unique opportunity had presented itself. Usually, Madame Lager is in the office by 2 o'clock, just like an employee. It is only on the first Wednesday of every month that she heads to the Ministry of Finance for her pension. When she stopped by today for her documents, Descharneau told her that her husband would be waiting in his office at 4 sharp. She had no reason to doubt him. From that moment on, everything was easy, too easy. Several creditors had gathered in the waiting room, as they do every afternoon. They could testify that Descharneau never left the premises. But then only once, at 4:15, note the time, the phone rang. A wrong number, according to Descharneau, who gave a rather clumsy explanation for the call. We are about to find out if there is a button under his desk in the waiting room that can trigger a bell. It's a logical assumption. A clerk needs a way to warn his boss about unwanted visitors. That is easily checked, the magistrate noted. The rest is equally simple. So at 4:15, Descharneau enters his employer's office. He knows Lager returned half an hour earlier. As usual, Lager is asleep. For a former arms dealer like Descharneau, it is no great feat to obtain a silencer. He attaches it to the revolver taken from the desk drawer and fires at point-blank range. Yes, but... Wait. He hides a silencer in his pocket, or, more likely, flushes it down the toilet. He returns to the waiting room and waits for us. When we arrive, he claims Lager will be back shortly. We all wait together. Descharneau listens. At exactly 4 o'clock, he hears Madame Lager's footsteps as she climbs the back stairs, and he presses the button for the internal phone. I don't understand. How can you not see it? He needed a shot, proof that, at that very instant, Lager had either committed suicide or been murdered. Just now, the local commissioner tried to call the internal extension from the waiting room and failed. I'll bet the wire was connected to a firecracker placed on the windowsill in the corridor. By the way, I forgot to mention that when we walked in, that window was open. Everything seemed to happen right in front of us, right under our noses. We rush in, bursting into the room and frightening Madame Lager, who hid behind the curtain. Maigret paused, adding with a faint smile, "When I first entered the office, I was struck by an inconsistency. Now I understand what it was. Like any old smoker, I can tell the difference between the smell of fresh smoke and stale smoke. The office did indeed smell of gunpowder, but the scent was cold. The medical examiner, whom we shall speak with again, made an error regarding the onset of rigor mortis. His mistake was caused by the body being slumped against a hot radiator, which, on the windowsill, they discovered traces of a firecracker and fragment of copper wire connected to the internal telephone. It's a lie," Descharneaux screamed during his first interrogation. But the following day, he hanged himself in his cell, having torn his shirt to fashion a rope.